great information to discuss today. So welcome everyone. I'm Dana Pauly. I'm the Interim Executive Director for Leadership Montgomery. I want to welcome you all to the third part in our series, Looking Forward. Today's session is on health and values-based leadership. I am really excited to welcome our moderator for today, Dr. Patty McClay. She is an SLM 2020 graduate. So go ahead and get us started, Patty.
Thank you. Am I unmuted? I am unmuted. Yes.
You're good.
You. Good. Thank you, Dana, and a warm spring welcome to everyone here. I would like to start by introducing our three panelists and then welcome each of them to offer their opening thoughts as we look to rebuild and recover from the pandemic. So I don't think Dr. Majarad is here yet, right? Is he? Not yet. Okay, good. So we'll save his intros till he's here. Well, I can talk. The three panelists we have are Dr. Kayvon Majarad, who is the director, Emerging Infectious Diseases Branch, Walter Reed Institute of Research, and Dr. Sherry Wallington, raise your hand there, assistant professor and health disparities researcher specializing in oncology in the Policy, Population, and Systems Department of George Washington University. And Beza Gabriana, I hope I said that right. And she is the community engagement lead coordinator for the Henry M. Jackson Foundation for the Advancement of Military Medicine. And she's also Emerging Leaders 2019. So we will get started. So we'll start with Dr. Wallington. Can you welcome and please offer your opening thoughts and comments?
Oh, great. Thank you so much. And I just want to thank all of you for this opportunity to really just be with you this afternoon for what I hope will be a rich discussion and that we all will leave here with some pearls of wisdom, some nuggets that we can use to take back to our families, our workplaces. And one of the things that all of us must realize at this point is every model, every framework, every way of doing anything has totally gone out the window. Everything has changed. And one of the things that, as a cancer disparities researcher, we really have what I would say is a pandemic on a pandemic on a pandemic. So some of the issues that we are grappling with now really have just simply been exacerbated because of COVID. Pre-COVID, we started to see some of the events in our country that have saddened many of us, I'm sure, around race and structural racism. We've always had disparities, whether people labeled them as that or not, but many of these things are now exacerbated. So now we are in the midst of COVID. And as someone who watches the rates go up and down, watches the geographical patterns of vaccine uptake, vaccine hesitancy, what I really hope that we leave here is an understanding about what the science is trying to tell us and teach us. I know that a lot of people are getting disheartened with the science, especially in the news today when we're hearing all of the reports about the recent Johnson & Johnson vaccine, other adverse conditions. You know, we just have a plethora of overwhelming information. And I think one of the things we have to remember is that in this information landscape, so we got Twitter, we got news, we got information 24/7. And even if you have a PhD or not, it really takes a whole lot to cipher and try to disentangle and navigate all the information. But what I would say is we should really follow the science, as Dr. Anthony Fauci has said so many times. Try to listen to the reports. If there are things that you or your family don't understand, reach out to persons such as the departments of health in your state, also academicians and researchers, and also leaders in your community to find out more information about tangible things that we can do. The CDC has released several strategies, and it is changing almost every day. As someone who works in a school of nursing, and we are training nurses, we have nurses that are working on COVID units. My students are saying to me, you know, this is really hard. Every day I go to work, there's a new protocol, there's a new policy. The physicians, medical staff, everybody is just so weary and wiped out. But I hope that what we will leave here today are some useful strategies that we can take into our workplace. I would say one of the things I put in the chat, how do we reduce the fear? And one of the ways we reduce the fear and uncertainty is that we must make sure that we are giving trusted, clear, and accurate and consistent information so that people can use it in a manner that's appropriate for them. And so I'll stop there. I look forward to this wonderful conversation, and I'm just so excited to be here. Thank you.
Good, there we go. Thank you, Dr. Wellington, for sharing. And I see that Dr. Kayvon Majorat is in his Zoom cube. Welcome. We have already done your introduction of your background. So if you could give us your opening thoughts in terms of moving forward post-pandemic.
Thanks so much. And it's a great opportunity for me to be here to speak with you all. And particularly to speak after Dr. Wallington made some really salient points that I'll echo to some extent and expand upon. So my background is I'm a physician, I'm a scientist, and I've been working on coronaviruses for the past 10 years. So it's been a surreal state of affairs over the last year to see the world gripped on a issue, on a pathogen that the very small group of us had been working on previously. And that's, I think, one of the key issues here is that this is all new. This is new for everybody, even within the scientific community. Coronaviruses were discovered in the 1930s in animals, but they weren't discovered in humans until the 1960s. But you'd say, okay, that's a half century or more. But really, there wasn't much attention paid to coronaviruses because they were deemed to be not much of a threat, causing the common cold in kids and not really presenting any additional danger beyond that. Not until the highly pathogenic coronaviruses started to emerge in 2002 with SARS-CoV-1, and then MERS in 2012, and of course, COVID-19 a year and a half ago. And you could say that we learned somewhat about coronavirus biology over the past 2 decades, but the kinds of investments and attention that have been paid to other infectious diseases like HIV, tuberculosis, malaria, and others that have been around for us for a long time, we are not anywhere near in the state of the science and the state of the art of understanding this virus. So it is that what is the consequence of that? The consequence is that we are having to communicate data and information that is new and incomplete. Science is, and the scientific process is iterative. We operate in the scientific world in a realm of probabilities. But in the outside world, in the lay world, in the lay communities, people want definitive answers. And somehow we have to bridge those two different ways of approaching questions and try to communicate that we are doing the work to get the most accurate information on the data that we have right now. And the way science and nature works. Nature doesn't reveal all of its secrets all at once. And we're going as fast as we can. We're bringing in experts from all different fields, from the HIV world, from other viruses, from different fields or disciplines of immunology, to all tackle this issue as quickly and as definitively as we can. So I see our role in the scientific community as educators of educators. And that's why it's so, I'm getting an echo. If you're not muted. So we are, we're really tasked with the challenge as scientists and investigators to, as I said, to educate the educators. And what I mean by that, of course, is what really the whole idea of community engagement is to talk with trusted leaders in the community and give them the opportunities to ask all the questions that they have, that are circulating in their communities. They are representatives of their communities, because there's plenty of sociological studies that have shown that oftentimes people don't trust the people with the PhDs and the MDs. They don't trust the experts, and that problem has been amplified even so over the past few years. So it's more important than ever that we have this very close relationship with the community leaders so that they're able to translate a lot of that information in a way that is palatable and understandable to their constituents in their communities. And I think that's a process that's going to have to continue. And the current pandemic has really highlighted those issues. And one of those pandemics within a pandemic that Dr. Wallington just talked about, pandemic of misinformation. And we have to address that pandemic at the same time that we're addressing the viral pandemic. So thanks again, and I'm looking forward to the panel discussion later in the hour.
Thank you so much, Majarad, for sharing. I mean, Dr. Majarad, because the sharing of both that it's new and education really do link together when you think of the two concepts. So Beza, can you please share your thoughts, your opening thoughts for our meeting today?
Absolutely. Thank you. And hello, good afternoon, everyone. So I want to first thank you all, Leadership Montgomery, for really having opened this platform for us to have this dialogue about the importance of research, community engagement, and specifically the importance of addressing inequities in research and involvement. So my background is actually in public health, and I spent about 4.5 years before joining this task force for community engagement at RARE, working on palliative and hospice care. So advocating for end-of-life care and really pushing for communities to learn more about end-of-life. But when the pandemic hit, I mean, we all noticed how it really greatly impacted communities of color, specifically the Black, Brown, and Latino community were disproportionately impacted by it. And I noticed that, and it had an impact on me. So I actually switched jobs in the middle of the pandemic, primarily because I saw that there's an organization that was pushing for bringing equity in even research and clinical involvement of communities that have been really greatly and disproportionately impacted by COVID. So really today, I hope that we can dive into how involvement from community involvement, not only those of from the marginalized communities, but everyone's involvement in clinical research could really push us forward to a better future in handling future pandemics So I'm looking forward to having this dialogue and addressing how engagement could be a valuable asset in every aspect of health.
Thank you so much, the three of you. Great opening comments. We'll start with some questions now, and I'd like to direct the first one to Dr. Majerad. We have 3 COVID vaccines, and we know that others are being developed, like the ferritin-based one that you're working on at Walter Reed. Can you address the idea of the production of different vaccines, especially if they are using the same delivery platforms? And how do you balance vaccine production with the possible emergence of future pandemics?
Thanks for that question. So I think a larger theme here that we're going to keep running into over this hour, and on and on over the course of the pandemic after it wanes and we prepare for future pandemics, is that health disparities that Beza Gibrihana just mentioned, the issues of misinformation, the problems that we've seen with distribution, deployment, testing infrastructure, all of those problems and gaps were extant. They were existing at the time. And what the pandemic did, it was a stress test, and it revealed all those problems to us. So first thing is, I hope that we're going to look at all those wounds or gaps that were just below the surface and take lessons on and recognize where they were and how we need to address them going forward. We have very short memories when it comes to these kinds of public health crises, that we don't learn from them and we don't take the lessons and apply them forward, and we apply them proactively before the next public health crisis occurs. That is my hope. So when people say, when are we getting back to normal? I say, I hope never. I hope we're getting back to a new normal. And so the question about manufacturing and production of vaccines, what you're seeing in the world right now is countries and communities that have fewer resources, less means to control their own destiny, to dictate their own fate. And I was talking about this yesterday in a seminar, that we're in a situation that they're dependent on countries and organizations that have those resources. One of the issues that came out of the response to the 2014 West Africa Ebola outbreak that the WHO had to take on was building the research and development, production, manufacturing, regulatory, and deployment infrastructure in lower and middle income countries so that they're not dependent and we're not running into these problems of, well, when are we going to get the vaccine access more broadly distributed to the rest of the world? That will also then, and a number of people have said this. Many of our public health leaders have talked about how, and then the quote that was read to me yesterday by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation was that investing in that kind of infrastructure in less developed communities within richer countries, and then less developed or less resourced countries, investing in those capabilities and competencies is ultimately going to benefit the countries that are making the investments as well. And specifically to the question that you're addressing, it will free up that manufacturing and production queue, so that not everything is forced onto one existing system, that there's a fight for space to make this vaccine versus that vaccine. If we distribute it more broadly, then we have a lot more space, a lot more resources to make all different types of vaccines. But the other thing about this is, and these different types of platforms is going to be trying to do the research, because this is also the first time that we've had multiple vaccines across different platforms, new platforms, developed and authorized pretty much at the same time for one pathogen. And so we're now having to do the studies to understand which platform is better for which population, for which moment of the pandemic, which type of community. It's not necessarily one vaccine fits all, one size fits all. And I think those are some of the questions that we're in a different phase of the pandemic that we're trying to answer.
Thank you. I could not have thought of a better answer. That was phenomenal to the question. But you did bring up the ideas of wounds and the newness of all of this. So Dr. Wallington, stress, the feeling of not being in control of one's life can play a major role in disease susceptibility, especially viruses or all illnesses, in fact. What are your recommendations to help all of us deal with the stress of having to accept that due to the pandemic, what was before is no more?
Thank you. That's such a good question, because we've had at George Washington University many conversations about stress. And you and I were even talking about, when you think about individuals' chromosomes, how stress can reduce the telomeres, and that can make individuals susceptible to all types of chronic diseases and shorten lifespan. But one of the things I think in particular workplaces are having to grapple with are that we didn't, although mental health certainly is one of those issues that were issues that were overlooked before the pandemic. And we see this with adults, we see this with children. The idea of being isolated for long periods of time. You know, my heart really goes out to parents who are homeschooling children, and they are hooked to that computer day in and day out. And we do not even know what the psychological, impact of that is. And then also people who, are we going back to work? How will work life look? In our organization, it would almost be cheaper for us to move, because our workplaces are not feasibly set up to handle the social distance guidelines that workplaces will be required to make. And I think organizations need to plan for how they will help their employees manage, some of the work stress. And what causes this stress? Well, certainly things people hear in the news, certainly the uncertainty about, I just got the J&J vaccine, do I need to be worried? All those things that are out there where no one is giving them accurate messages, or because people are hooked up to social media 24 hours and they're getting conflicting reports, people having hooked up to the internet, getting some information but not accurate information. And these are things that lead to stress, especially when there's no one for that person to vet that information through. And then another thing too is, not all businesses have emergency preparedness plans. Everyone was just scrambling. Some organizations have really robust HR departments. Many large organizations have health information officers that can put together robust plans. And now what organizations are having to look at, what do individuals' health insurance plans look like for covering costs related to COVID, whether it's mental health issues, whether it's stress. Can you get extra days off because you feel like you're just overly stressed due to the pandemic? So these are kinds of issues that I think organizations are grappling with. But I think what everybody is trying to do is to work on plans. I know that at George Washington University, our senior leadership team is constantly working with the DC Department of Health. We have faculty who work very closely with the CDC to make sure that individuals, when they come back to work, return to work, that there are guidelines, and we need clearer guidelines, and we need policies that really just cease to exist right now. So we're just in the throes of the newness and trying to figure out all of this.
Thank you so much, Dr. Wallington. And one of the things we know about stress is that it takes you away from the ability to think and plan. So the planning component you bring up is critically important. Mm-hmm. But because stress also drops our ability to think, the next question I have is to you, Besa, and it is, many individuals can't wait to be vaccinated. However, there are groups that voice vaccine hesitancy. This can be based upon the science of vaccine development or grounded in disinformation and conspiracy theory. Both sets of beliefs can act to prolong our reaching herd immunity. This is especially pertinent to businesses that reopen and find that their team members may not all believe in being vaccinated. So how do leaders, in fact, all of us on this Zoom call, approach those individuals and engage them in effective conversation? And again, any of you can jump in on this question also. So yeah.
Yeah, thank you. That's a great question. I'll start, I think, how leaders can approach individuals in engaging in this conversation. I think right now we see that we've seen it in the news where we're looking into using vaccine passports as a way of verifying, right? As a way of seeing if people can travel across, different nations or even work. So considering that as a method to encourage employees to take the vaccine. My thought on that, in terms of first in leaders in encouraging employees to take the vaccine, is a little different in the sense that I think employers should really look into addressing the hesitancy that's happening first and where it's stemming from. A lot of individuals don't want to take the vaccine for multitude of reasons, including, cultural. There's mistrust that we've discussed a bit ago, and also just not trusting whether or not it would be effective in really fully being able to help them, protect them from getting the vaccine. So there's a lot of information that we need to address through education with employees. So employers should first consider, I think, and building a capacity and providing information for their employees to feel adequately prepared to come back to, again, work. I think in terms of the research scientists really working on closing that gap in hesitancy, is really incorporating and listening to the concerns of the community when it comes to vaccine hesitancy, really listening, and listening takes a skill. It's a skill. So and scientists taking a pause and listening to why people are saying we don't want to take it, and acknowledging it with empathy is important. Then moving forward in creating tools that can move us forward to feeling comfortable to actually take the vaccine. So that's sort of my take on how employees and organizations can actually contribute to moving us forward with hesitancy issues in place.
Thank you, Beza, because I'm hearing the importance of that empathy and kindness and education. Dr. Majorat or Dr. Wallington, do you want to add anything to this really important question of hesitancy? Share it, you're on mute.
Yeah, I have to do that once a day. Okay, I just really want to say that when we talk about vaccine hesitancy, this is not new. And it's not new because of COVID, because when you look at the research, we have vaccine hesitancy with influenza vaccine. Many of my NIH studies were funded for the HPV vaccine. Now talk about vaccine hesitancy initially, although the uptake and completion is getting better. But when you look at vaccines and the history of vaccines, and Dr. Majorat would know this, in the US, we have had a very strong anti-vaccine sentiment in this country. And one of the things I think that we have not done a good job, the anti-vaxxers have done a good job with flooding the landscape with anti-vaccine messages. But we in the public health space, we have not done a good job with our communication. We have not done messaging. And when you have time, sometimes I want you to go out and look on YouTube and just see all of the anti-vaccine messages. I mean, this one guy, he talks about HPV, he talks about every vaccine there is, and he is at the billion view mark. I mean, people just viewing that. And so I think that we need to do a better job talking about the benefits, just flooding the landscape with positive and beneficial information about why vaccines are important and why they are important for our society. And I think one of the things that we can do to reduce vaccine hesitancy, I think we all have kind of said it today, is we can't just put the onus on individuals, and I've said this before, to trust us, to trust the science, to trust us as a researcher, because we have not always been trustworthy, have we? As organizations, as science communities, there are many reasons why we have given the public reasons why they should not trust us. So first, as scientists and communities, we have to learn to become trustworthy. So how do people trust? Think about your relationships. That's why we need community engagement, so that we can build relationships, so that we can start to build those relationships of trust. And if you think about your family relationships, your partner relationships, if you're married, how does trust break down? And how trust breaks down is when we're not honest, when we're not consistent, and when we don't communicate well. And I think we can apply that to how we communicate, how we message. See, when conditions happen, we need to be out there saying, you know, and I'll say this, when the first incidents with J&J, they were a little slow to get out in front of it. Don't be reactive, be proactive, and say, when people say, and Dr. Majorat, you may not agree with me, but when people say, oh, vaccines, there are no adverse conditions, we know that that's not true, because depending on what population the vaccine is for, there could be some adverse conditions. So we need to be honest and truthful and be honest with the public about vaccines, and we need to be more consistent in our messaging.
Dr. Majorat, please jump right in there.
Dr. Wallington, I actually completely agree with you. And I'll get to that in a moment, but first, I think what you heard from Ms. Geberana and Dr. Wallington is that nature abhors a vacuum. We know this, this phrase all very well, but it extends to community engagement as well. If we in the public health community, in the scientific and medical communities, deprioritize community engagement, someone else is going to come in and fill the space. And someone else with an agenda. Okay. And it may not be a lot of people or groups, but it'll be a vocal and a ideologically a driven groups that we've seen. There's recently been done a study, an investigative report on the anti-vaccination movement, and the majority of the material that is put out there can be sourced to 12 individuals, right? So clearly, and it's amazing that we are being, there are many of us, there are thousands, hundreds of thousands of us, millions of us in the public health community, and we're being beat out by just a handful of individuals, okay? And I think that is reflective of how we have not prioritized this enough to educate the public, to be transparent about the transgressions of the past, and be open about how we are remedying those mistakes that we're taking in the past. Vaccine hesitancy, anti-vaccination rhetoric is as old as vaccines themselves. If you go back to when the first vaccines were developed in their most rudimentary form, the origin of the word vaccine, vaca, cow, it comes from cowpox. When Edward Jenner noticed that the milkmaids who were milking the cows they had smooth skin, they had no pock marks, they didn't get smallpox, but they had all sorts of bumps and grooves on their hands from the cowpox. And he realized that the cowpox was actually protecting them against the smallpox. And that virus, the vaccinia virus, then became the first vaccine that was used to protect against the variola virus, smallpox. Now, if you go back to pamphlets that were being distributed at that time, as they were starting to vaccinate individuals in England, there were all these pamphlets and information going out there because we had the printing press at that time. And they were saying that if you get this vaccine, it's going to turn you into a cow. And there are all these images of people who are half human, half cow. And that has continued onward to the late 19th century when anthrax vaccines were developed, and onward and onward. And then into the 80s with pertussis up till now. And it has ebbed and flowed, but I think it's gained a lot of momentum recently because it's been a good few years for conspiracy theory. They've gotten a lot of fuel and extends to all different sectors of society, but it bleeds over into vaccination campaigns and anti-vaccination campaigns as well. So how do we address it? As I said, we have to be transparent, we have to be open, we have to be engaged, but scientists are scientists. The life sciences, the physical sciences, they're not necessarily trained or the most talented always in communication. So we can't do everything. That's why we need partnerships. We need more than ever closer partnerships with our community leaders, with experts in the sociological sciences and the political sciences as well, to help us craft our messages in a way that the public will understand, in a way that the public can trust. And that's only going to be possible through these kinds of engagements, through these kinds of partnerships, if we're ever going to make any kind of headway into addressing what has been really a perpetual and ubiquitous issue of vaccine hesitancy.
Thank you so much, Majrad. Dr. Majrad, that's a great answer. And doing practical education, my next question is going to be for you, and it's a two-part question concerning virus transmission. For how long do you feel there will be a need to continue to use masks, especially in the workplace? And along that same line of thinking, what is now the accepted route or routes of COVID-19 transmission? And what implication does that have in terms of workplace setup, cleaning, and sanitation?
Here's a perfect example where we need additional partnerships and bringing in individuals that weren't necessarily involved in life sciences, in virology and immunology, is engineers and infrastructure development individuals and maintenance experts and HVAC experts, those sorts of things, is working all together and going based off of the most up-to-date science at the time. So getting to one of Dr. Wallington's points is that why do I come to work every day and there's new information and the protocols have changed? It's because, again, there are studies that were done that have to be done deliberately, carefully, to make sure that we don't go back and revise what may have been sloppy science. And that takes time, and you have to replicate these sorts of things. So something that we suspected for a long time, that surfaces, what we also call fomites, which is just objects that can be used to transmit. If a child licks on a toy, does then that toy become an agent of transmission? We always suspected that was probably not going to be a major mode of transmission. But we had to do the studies and we had to repeat the studies to show that that wasn't the case. Here's the other problem is that, as I said before, people want definitive answers. So they want us to say 100%. That doesn't exist in the world of science. It is a game of probabilities. And even when it's 99.99999% answer something and say, can you tell me absolutely? Well, no, of course I can't tell you absolutely. And we're at a disadvantage there because the false prophets are going to give you 100% answers all the time. And we have to find a way to communicate risk-benefit calculations, risk-benefit analyses, denominators. We don't have to communicate necessarily what this protein is and how we modify it to this. It's actually those larger issues of how do we calculate risk-benefit. And if we can communicate that accurately and get to a point where our societies really understand those kinds of concepts, then I think we'll do much better. As far as transmission and masks, Dr. Fauci was a mentor of mine, was my boss's boss when I was doing my fellowship at the NIH. And there's been a lot of criticism of him and other public health leaders saying, well, in the beginning of the pandemic, you said the masks weren't important. And all information pointed to, at the time, we were going based on historical data. This is something completely new. So we're assuming, okay, we know about other respiratory viruses, influenza, measles, and other coronaviruses. And we knew that the majority of transmissions, and for the case of other respiratory viruses, was occurring in the context of symptomatic individuals, symptomatic transmission. We did not expect there to be this level of asymptomatic transmission. And so as that data emerged, it became very clear that masks would mitigate transmission. But then wearing masks became a political statement, not a scientific issue. And here again, the scientists were unprepared for that. And here again is where we needed the partnership with our community leaders and our social scientists and political scientists to be able to translate the scientific information over to that kind of practical information. Going forward, what are we going to have to do about masks as the world gets vaccinated? At a certain point, we can very likely expect to take off those masks, as we're doing in small groups when we're now with families, and we have families that are all vaccinated, and we can kind of take that away. But we have to do this in a gradual way. It's not like one day we'll all come out and throw our masks in the air and burn them and hallelujah, we don't need these anymore. We're going to have to be deliberate about this process as we remove some of these restrictions on gatherings. Be very deliberate about this, be very cautious about this, to look at the data. What is that doing to emergence of new cases? If that suddenly causes a rise in cases even among the vaccinated, well, we have to understand, why is the vaccine not preventing transmission? Why is it still allowing asymptomatic infection? It has to be data driven every step of the way. I think we're going to get to a point where we're going to be able to return to a version of what we had pre-pandemic. I can't tell you exactly what that's going to look like and when exactly that's going to happen. But we're still a long ways from there in this country and globally in terms of getting people vaccinated, getting to a level of herd immunity where we can even start to begin to start removing a lot of those restrictions. And that's why it's so concerning when I see people talking about policymakers implementing or deregulating things where they're allowing 40,000 people to come together. I don't think we're there yet. And it's very frustrating for people to not be there yet, but we have to be careful because we don't want to send ourselves backward. If we take a slower pace, a more deliberate pace, then I think we'll make more progress. We'll keep going forward without it taking any steps backward.
Thank you, Dr. Masharad. And with that idea of transparency and trust, with community engagement, Beza, how would you recommend Americans work to restore their trust, especially in science?
I think we first have to start with the science community being and creating the pathway for community to have a stakeholder and a decision-making ability in research, and creating the pathway to allowing not only just sharing our discoveries and our results as science institutes, but also allowing early on involving the community in decision making when it comes to the beginning, the middle, and the end of all that we do in research, and implementing an effective community engagement program, which we've seen it in the in the HIV epidemic, and how we have utilized community engagement to really propel us towards incorporating really well communities' involvement in research, and that could be adapted in this pandemic. And I mean, I can tell you how our coalition implementing it, our community engagement here at RARE, which we're working on our own, as Dr. Masharad said, we're working on our own version of a COVID vaccine, and to think ahead and be proactive and say we are gonna incorporate the voices of the community in every aspect of research, I think is critical and would be the staple in in every part of research. So some things that we've done is that we have established a community advisory board that has direct input in some of the research that we do pertaining to our own vaccine. And then we also take a very, very comprehensive approach to involving, hence why, partnering with community based organizations like Leadership Montgomery that really care about in educating the community and moving us forward to the better future. So I see that community involvement being both from informational to collaborative to both direct involvement in research. So I foresee that community involvement being such a big part of our future.
Thank you so much. And thank you to all three of our panelists. It's been a very engaging discussion. Would like to open it for Q&A now. So if anyone has any questions, do you want to put them in the chat, or if they want to, unmute yourself and ask them, that would be great. We do have one question in, will social distancing pretty much be a constant in the workplace going forward? So any of you can jump in on that one.
I think I put a comment that I think that was Kathy's question. And basically, I think in the near immediate future, yes, because workplaces are looking at different models. So I'm just going to say Sylvia and Deandra, maybe you might come into the workplace on Monday and Wednesdays, but then your colleagues would still telework, and then they would come in on Thursdays and Fridays. So different models and different frameworks, because most workplaces have a cubicle environment. And so in order to make it safe, they're looking at making sure that people have alternate work days and plans. We're looking at that at GW. I think Dr. Margerat said all of those things related to HVAC, upgrading that so that the air is clean, having the staff to come in and clean. When you have a workspace, I'll just talk about what our workspace at GW. The cleaning has to be consistent and it has to be often. And there's a great expense that comes with that. So all of these details have to be worked out. But it's my thought that in the near future, yes, we still need to practice those social distancing, but some of the very reasons you heard tonight, now, not all persons are getting vaccinated. And we haven't even talked about the fact that can employers mandate vaccinations? Right now, that is not the case, but that may be a possibility, and that might be a different session or topic. Can small businesses who are private, can they mandate that their employees be vaccinated? So those are some of the kinds of questions, but it's my feeling that for the near future, yes, we still need to do social distancing because not everyone is getting vaccinated, and vaccination is not mandated.
Thank you, Dr. Wallington. Any other comments on that question? Anyone else?
Hi. Yes. Hi. My name is Deandra. One of the community health workers here within the Washington, D.C. and Maryland area. I totally agree with Dr. Wellington with that. I think that is something that really needs to be kind of important to put down the pipeline with a lot of the offices. I have been privileged enough to frequent many CBOs in the area, and mandating the vaccination is strongly advised on my part. There's a lot of staff who has not gave any attention to the importance of being vaccinated. We have had several employees at quantity of 30 to 40 at different sites who have tested positive. I'm also one who had corona over the summer and dealt with a very heavy case of pneumonia with it, due to going into the office periodically, like similar to how they're doing the hybrid learning and for the kids. So certain, staff will go in on certain days and then other staff will go on other days. And yes, with expectations, especially working within a healthcare facility, that these places are being cleaned properly. And that was not the case. But what I'm also learning is some staff are partaking into getting vaccinated because you have offices that are offering incentives. So if they get their vaccinations, they are getting Visa gift cards. But this is still with no education on the back end of why and how important it is to do this, especially not just keeping yourself safe, but also keeping your family safe as well. And I'm just happy to say that I've actually had both of my shots through Moderna and didn't have any complications or symptoms, but I definitely agree with some of the comments that Dr. Wellington said.
Thank you, Deandra. And I think at this point, looking at the clock, we're going to probably have to close, right, Dana? And I will turn it back over to you. And thank you to the three panelists. Dr. Wellington had to scoot out to another meeting, but thank you, Dr. Mojarrad, and thank you, Beza Gebrana, for being here with us. Dana.
And thank you, Patty, for moderating this hour for everyone. I don't know about all of you, but I feel like I got like the gold ticket of to special information today. This was a wonderful conversation. So for me, I just want to highlight a couple of the values that I heard because they match my own values, and I hope that all of you found some information today that attributes to how you lead and the things that you think about. So for me, the value of transparency and listening, the value of partnerships, and the value of community involvement. I want to thank our panelists once more for their time this afternoon. I want to thank Patty for moderating again. Those of you that have any additional questions, I believe that you can send them to us and we'll do our best to follow up with the panelists and get those answers for you. We have one more part left in this series. Please join us if you can next week for new business models. We look forward to that conversation and we look forward to seeing you all again soon. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you all. Thank you.